Welcome everyone to today's Midnight 6.6 training session. Today we'll be going over print estimating at a basic and introductory level. And this is part 2 of our 15-part training series, going over the various modules of Midnight. We'll be going over the areas on how to set up your print estimating system to work in its key areas of functionality, such as presses, warehouse for inventory, and ink. We'll also be taking a look at how to set up templates for quick data entry, how to identify reports that utilize print estimating information effectively. Also a brief look at some other areas of how print estimating affects and is affected throughout the system. To start things off, we'll create an estimate. And do note that this does assume that you've got some familiarity with creating estimates and orders within Midnight. What we'll see after creating an estimate is that we can select our customer. We can fill out our general information on our project. And we can fill out our expected quantity. From here, I'll also plug in the due date, which we'll be referencing later on. And now I'll enter my print tab. From here, we'll see that I can select a service that's going to have the action of print calculator. Doing so will bring up our print calculator. And we'll be referencing this screen for the majority of today's session. In particular, after you've brought up the print calculator, you'll see that there's quite a few tabs on the far left. Note that we're in the Press Details tab first. The print calculator assumes and derives a lot of its logic from the press that's been selected, as you have the ability to set up in your system presses that are compatible with sheet or roll fed materials, as well as have digital presses that operate off of click and or click ink combinations, or inkjet machines, which are specifically ink-based machines with no click to handle. There is a built-in cutter that our system can account for. And for your other services like bindery, stitching, folding, etc., they can be added in through the additional services tab here. The imposition details will calculate itself for you, letting you know the count up that you get per sheet. The volume pricing is as you would expect it to be, related to the pricing of your job. And the notes and run details simply give you more information about your print job. Starting from the top, we have the ability to fill out a name or a description for our print service. Note that the service I selected has its service name here for the part name. You could have service names for, say, book covers, postcards, business cards, etc. And then have your description be a more detailed feature, such as the name of the book that you're doing or business cards for a certain individual. We also have the ability to set up and select a template. When you pick a template, it fills out information on everything here below, with the exception of the description of the job that you're running. We'll notice that our quantity has defaulted to the expected quantity of the estimate that we're working on. And the number of pages, which we won't be going over today, is a feature related to multi-part jobs, particularly books. Again, the multi-part job is a feature that we won't be going over in today's session, but in order to activate it, you can click the screen Make Multi-Part Job button. And this will allow you to set up a job that utilizes everything within the print calculator for one all-encompassing job that accounts for multiple pieces, such as a cover versus a text stock. The presses that we see in this press selected list can be set up in a variety of ways. These are all our digital and offset presses. If we're to select a digital, the default information will come in from the admin menu settings. And you'll see your sheet type icon here in the upper right, updated based on the compatibility of sheet that your press is set to roll with. If you have a sheet fed press, then this will remain this icon. If you have a roll fed press, then your icon will change. This corresponds to the inventory that we see under the Paper Details tab. The inventory here for my rolls, you'll see is very limited. But if I were to select a sheet fed machine, you'll see that our icon will change back. And if we look in our Press Details tab, our Paper Details tab, our inventory is going to be more accurately built, referencing sheets rather than rolls. In this case, I've selected an offset press or inkjet press. We can tell that if we look in the Color Details tab by seeing our different combinations of side options and colors or color groups. And here there's also a default coverage and a cost per pound, as well as your place costing and count. If you were to select a digital press instead, depending on the type of digital press that you have, you can have it set to be run with clicks, inks, or a combination of the two. And depending on your run type, either one-sided or two-sided, you'll see one or two sides here for your available clicks and for your ink combinations. Looking at digital press here, we see that we can define the size of our product. For instance, we'll work on 8.5 by 14 menus. We can see that we have the option to run it as one-sided or two-sided, which is defaulted based on our presses set up in the admin menu. And some other features come in from the admin menu, such as the sheet margin, bleed, foliage, the impressions per hour, which is a production speed of pieces per hour, the hourly rate, which is assumed to be an hourly cost of what it will take to run your machine. Do note that this accounts for what we would assume that you would plug in for insurance, electrical, overhead expenses, floor space, that sort of thing. Labor itself is not automatically determined, so if you'd like to add that in as well, we suggest averaging your floor team's wage rates into a low to mid expectation of what labor costs may be, and then incorporating that into the hourly rate as well. The registration marks, as well as the bleed and sheet margin, determine how much printable space there is on the material that's being run through your press. Obviously, the more area you have taken away, the less room you have for your impressions. The three percentages that we have over here for overage, spoilage, and bindery spoilage, they refer to the amount of waste material or additional material that will be consumed for the completion of the job. This percentage is one that you can apply within the press, or you can fill out flat counts for other options. And for our digital press here, we'll see that we have our setup controls. We can do setup costing either by each individual piece or a flat cost of a one-time application per job. For instance, a 2-cent per piece or $30 one-time application of a setup fee. And finally, in here we have our setup time in minutes, which will account for how much time will be spent on the job, and therefore allow scheduling to be even more simple to work with. And you have a setup count of sheets, which again tracks into the amount of required material to complete a job. Because we're on a digital press, again we can see our click combinations. Sometimes our users have had to enter clicks in a variety of ways based on the size of the click, and they'll have a different price per combination. Other times they're just a straight black or color click operation cost, no matter what the size is being printed. Fill them out at your discretion or based on what your vendor has provided to you. The ink details for a digital press allow simple single color coverage And you can set up pricing in 3 different ways. We'll identify those 3 different methods of pricing later on, but note that whichever one you select, whether it be volume-based, printed area-based, or time-based, their details will appear right underneath each ink selector. Under the Paper Details tab, you can select your paper in one of 2 different ways. You can either select it from the drop-down menu here and filter your results by typing, giving you a breakdown of any area that has this particular variable in, that variable being whatever you type. Alternatively, after selecting your paper, you can click the blue paper button here. This pulls up a screen in which you can search for inventory with a different method, either by selecting from an available list of what colors you have, grades, finish weights, etc. And then when you're ready, simply click it and that paper will be loaded in instead. You'll have your parent sheet listed and your run sheet listed. The parent sheet is what you'll be adding in for the item and its dimensions of your stock. The run sheet is what's actually being run through your machine. What this means is that if you're slicing your material before you run it through your press, or if you're not and you're printing out smaller pieces than what your stock actually would be as it goes through the press, this will help determine how many sheets or how many feet of your roll are actually required to complete your job. Information from the press stock will be loaded down here below. Notice that we have a caliper, and we also have a cost per M sheet, or cost per 1,000 sheets. Additionally, there's a paper markup. The cost and the paper markup are fields that can be edited on the fly, and they are what derives the costing for any sheet type inventory. The caliper is related towards our cutter, as it relates to the thickness of the stock. If your paper does not have a caliper, it's not recognized as a material thick enough to be cut in our cutter, and therefore it won't tell you how many cut time and or how many lifts are required for the operation itself. The other fields in here: finish, grade, opacity, basis weight. Currently they just correspond to information pieces to help make sure that you're selecting the right inventory. But we are building in new features into the system which may look at them in the future. So depending on how your inventory is set up, you may want to make sure these are filled out as accurately as possible as soon as you add your inventory into the system. After you filled out your materials, your size, and you've selected your paper and your color count, then you've done pretty much everything that there is to do. In this case, I'll fill out my color quick combinations with no flood coverage of any kind, my 18 by 12 stock, and my 8.5 by 14 required sheets along with my production info. At this point, we could hit calculate and let the system do its magic. Assuming there's no errors, you'll have information here on the right that let you know how much time, how many materials, and what the total cost is of your operation. You'll see that the imposition details is now lit green to let you know how many material or pieces up you're getting per sheet that you're printing on. Additionally, if you look at the Run Details tab, you'll see a breakdown of time, sheet count, cost, etc. This all adds together to give you your total cost, which includes your press cost, ink, clicks, paper, and any additional bindery services. This total cost is then hit with the markup, which is either defaulted on your template level, or if you're free entering, defaulted from an admin level, and can be adjusted as necessary to help meet the needs for your job. This all added together gives you a print total. This print total We'll then have any non-marked up services applied to it to give you your sale total. And that gets broken down to a unit cost, a unit price that is added to your job once you hit the submit button. At this point now, because we've selected a print service and we did not include any cutting, folding, etc., we just have one line item with a breakdown of our total cost. And we'll have our unit price as we just saw on the screen before us. You can't edit the details of this, such as the description, service code name, etc. But you can change the prices out here if you need to. I wouldn't recommend doing this, as if you have other services such as cutting and folding, changing the price of one element of the line item will not impact the others automatically, as it won't know how to offset costs. In this case, your other services will maintain their pricing should they exist. We'll do one more print service here and identify a different use case. In this example, we'll select a template to quickly fill in the information. In this sample, we'll do 4/4 business cards. This pulls in information for our digital press. Paper and everything is filled out accordingly. And we'll see that we are ordering our stock before running it through. In this case now, we have not only the change of material that's consumed, but we also do have additional services and perforation for our business cards. We also have volume pricing to account for, in which case, based on our quantity, to the count of 20,000 being exceeded by our necessary count, we'll see that this rate is what's applied for the cost, for the sale price, despite what the details are that add up to our total cost. For this example, I'll remove all of the pricing for our volume pricing tab, and we'll hit calculate to update the numbers to a more realistic amount. In this case now, after we see our print total, we have our extended price of our non-marked up service added on top of everything else to give us our grand total for sale. If this number is not what you need it to be, for instance, you want to round it to the nearest dollar, or you need to change an amount for it to update itself correctly, then you could add a price max, which is an invoiced price. Doing this maintains the records for all of your other services for costing reports, so that way you can track profitability as accurately as possible. In this case, I'll submit my business card service. And we'll see that now we have our business cards here. And under the finishing tab, we'll see our perforating service with its built-in cost. Note that if this was a service that was allowed to have markup on it, then this cost would be bumped up based on whatever the markup percentage was. The other one would as well, under here, and the sum of them would equal what we saw on the print estimation screen. If you were to send an estimate or a quote report to one of your clients for approval, pulling up our standard estimate price report, for instance, will give us just a general piece of info related to the print information by listing each element out as its own individual piece. And we do have a variety of other reports that show this info in different ways, so experiment with our reporting to see what works best for your needs. Assuming your customer has approved the quote that you've given to them based on what they're ordering, please suggest hitting the Export to Order button. This creates a new order and brings you right to it. Once you're inside your new order, You see that everything carried over, such as date, the job name, etc. Our print services, costs, and prices have carried over correctly. But we have a bit more info this time. In this case now we have our inventory tab, which is populated with 2 items. These 2 items came from the print services themselves and are listed in the order in which they're listed here. The quantity needed comes from inside of the print calculator and assumes not only the required material to complete the job, but also the make-ready material. The other values here, like the quantity on hand and pulled, relate to inventory deductions. That's a feature covered more during our inventory training session. And note that while you do have inventory auto-loaded in here from the print calculator, if you enter one of the print calculators and change the inventory by clicking launch, making your changes and hitting save and close, then the item record itself for that particular print task will be updated. Information in here will now present in a work order. These work order reports will show your print information in a variety of ways. In most cases, you'll be looking at a work order for a specific grid that shows info about the print task at hand, such as the name of what it is you're working on, the press it's going through, the material that's being run, details on the press operations itself, such as the up count, the impressions to expect, and the estimation of press time. You'll also see the additional services listed below, which include those perforating, folding, binding, stitching services that you may have thought about adding into your task. And finally, there's a list of the required material to complete the job, along with a barcode if you intend on using our inventory barcode scanner to quickly access your pieces for deduction. For other services that don't have certain elements of additional services, you don't need to worry about them, because they just won't appear within their grid. You also saw at the final page there were a list of both items. That's a dedicated inventory page. You could instead print off an inventory pull ticket. The inventory reports reference the pull ticket simply lists information on the inventory for the job and where it can be found, as well as where it needs to be brought. Now from here, the final thing that you can do as far as the job goes is look at the production board to see how your task is prepared to be scheduled out. I'm pulling up my dynamic job board here under the task view, and I'll be looking under the print tab, just like we have under this order for 1787, to find info on our job. In this case, you'll see here we have our 2 1787 services described accordingly, and we have an estimation of required time to complete the task. If you wish to log time, you can do so by clicking the actual time for 0 for that particular print task. You can split it up into several portions, tasks. There's a lot you can do here in the scheduling system, and we'll cover that more on their own training. You also note that the additional services appear under their respective tabs. In this case, the perforating service also has its own line under its respective department, with the calculation of expected time to complete, just like the others. Now we've controlled how to set up information and actually use it in a practical workflow. We'll take a look at the admin setup that handles the many areas that we looked at. The global settings tab is where a lot of info starts. In here, specifically related to print estimating, you'll see our estimates and orders sub-tab, in which we have a whole section dedicated towards feature controls and toggles. The ones important for you through today's training come from the third option, or the print estimate markup percentage, which is the default that's added in to all of your non-template based print services. We also have the price matching field in which you can turn it on or off. If you have this off, then your team will be strongly encouraged to let the system calculate out the cost for you. You'll see a default bleed. This we suggest entering in on your site based on the press info as a whole, so that way you don't have presses entered with no bleed by accident. We also have fields that allow users to have more control within the print calculator. These three checkboxes open up fields that may normally be locked. So that way you can either let the system do its work for you entirely, or if you have a more qualified print estimating team, you can open up fields and give a little bit more freedom to your team for data entry, such as allowing your team to enter Dutch cut values for your up count, or modify the actual required amount of material to complete a job, ignoring the fact that there may be a pretty accurate calculation from the make-ready foliage and required materials. The other two fields in here that matter are the minimum markup percentage, which is a value that prevents your team, your sales team, or CSRs from adding a markup that goes too low. And finally, an ink coverage default, which is 80 on your site, and simply relates to offset presses, ink coverage capabilities. That way, by default, you're having an accurate coverage based on the work that you're doing. Do note that the markup and the ink coverages can be assigned on the template level. You don't necessarily need this default. The next area we'll look at will be featured under the print submenu. In here, you'll have your print press standard list, and this is the list of all the machinery on your site. The presses themselves can be defined as a press of offset digital or wide format, and then a material compatibility can be selected as well. Depending on what you select, you'll have different options at the bottom. Most of these presses, digital or offset, sheet or roll, will have a default run type. Digital will be more simple, as just having a one or two side option, and offset machines having a more complicated series of two-sided print methods. The hourly rate, again, is assumed to be the cost of overhead expenses, plus labor if you find a way to add that in. The impressions per hour is the run speed. Foliage percentage is the waste material. The run sheet width and run sheet length determine the maximum size of stock that can be run through your machine. The gripper registration marks and color bars cut into the amount of printable space. And notably for offset machinery, we have our press check fee, which is a one-time sort of setup fee. If you didn't run an operation or don't run an operation, it encourages having your users come in to sign off on presses that are doing the work. And you can use this to supplement a one-time setup fee. There's also plate information, such as the cost per plate and the maximum amount of impressions the plate can actually print on before they have to be cycled out and replaced with new plates. There's also the make-ready info. You can either have make-ready info based on the entirety of the operation or the press make-ready feature, or you can have it based on each individual color that's being run through your machine, or the color unit make-ready. You can define your maximum color count per press here. We suggest having it 4, unless you have a 5 or 6 plus machine. And the make-ready materials and time, as well as repeat make-ready and wash-up, all interact with the required time and materials it takes to complete a job, knowing that based on whichever make-ready option you've selected, these numbers could be multiplied based on the color count. A digital press is relatively similar. Digital presses sacrifice the make-ready handlers for setup materials and setup time. They also have the ability to have clicks added in by going into this dark gray row and adding in your click info. You can then set a rate, and then check this checkbox to allow them to be selected on your estimate orders. You also have your 3 methods of ink set up: ink costing by area printed, ink costing on the per piece level, and ink related to the volume or amount of ink actually utilized. If you set this to none, then it simply doesn't clutter your live on job print screen. So if you're not sure if this is something you need to account for, you'd probably best to leave it off and run off clicks specifically. After you've filled out your clicks, we did of course have the color details tab next. For clicks, the color details tab handles the ink and the click combinations. For offset machinery, you don't quite have that simplicity. You'll need to build your individual colors along with a cost per pound per color. You also have the ink groups, where you can add your inks individually with a name and a cost per pound, as well as whether or not plate required. The ink groups can be set up so that way if you select the group, then each of the inks is applied to the job. You do so by creating your ink group here in this bottom row, clicking into it, confirming that your inks are correctly set up, and selecting the plate if necessary. Next after this is the warehouse module in which your inventory is controlled. Before we look too deeply in here, we will take a look at the item types control within the admin menu, as this helps determine how inventory is classified. Under the warehouse module, you have your item types sublist, and in here you'll have your print type column. Inventory marked as a print type, such as labels, envelopes, and paper. You'd expect it to default with a print type option. This makes them available for print estimate selection. The other 3 here for WF, laminate, and mount type all correspond to our wide format printers. So for today's training and for your general workflow, you may not need to worry about that. If you wish to create new item types or edit ones that currently exist, so that way they can be compatible with your presses, or this list just isn't cluttered, you can add new options in this bottom gray row, just like we saw with the other screens. Or you can click the edit button and deactivate an item type that's simply not being used. After you've got your item type set, you'll want to go into the warehouse module, either create a new item or modify one that currently exists. When you modify one that exists or create a new, the majority of the information you'll be looking at comes in the details tab for the paper detail. You do have some control from this details tab and from the header. The control in question relates to the inventory's accessibility. Inventory in Midnight is added in by determining a customer to assign it to first, and then making it available for all users or not by use of this global checkbox. For material that you'd consider to be in-house material, you want to name it accordingly, and you'll likely want to add the customer for that inventory type to one that's a self-named organization. You'll then check this global checkbox and make it available for all clients. Alternatively, if you have a material that a customer provides to you, that material is something you don't want to accidentally have selected on another job, you'll want to make sure the global box is unchecked. The other big things that you'll see in here that get a lot of use include 1, the reorder point quantity. These features allow your system to alert you when more inventory needs to be ordered, and if so, how much. You also have the PO item. This, when checked, allows you to select this item on your vendors. So that way you can order more inventory from your vendors in order to refill your stock accordingly. The majority of the rest of the info comes from the Paper Details tab, and this list is populated primarily through the selection of the material type of either sheet or roll. The column here on the left remains unchanged and gives you some general data features such as the opacity and finish of your stock, the vendor, and whether or not it's coded, which accounts for the required amount of ink to accurately cover what it is that you're printing on. The middle column will change a bit if you select roll versus sheet, where you have your caliper or the thickness of your paper and your weight. You have your parent sheet length and width, which is the actual dimensions of the stock itself before it's printed on. If you were to select roll, you'll see that this info changes to give you roll length and width instead. You also have a couple of different methods of price calculation. In here, you can do pricing based on the weight of your cylinder, the pricing based on one whole roll itself, or the pricing based on per foot that is printed. Depending on your workflow, you'll need to default this accordingly. Note that if you select a sheet, then you only have your cost per 1,000 sheets to worry about. Both of these item types utilize a paper markup. There are a variety of ways to use this, and if you do, then the paper markup applies markup to the stock before the job's markup as a whole applies. So do be aware that if you have, say, a 20% markup on your material and a 35% markup on your job, that your marked up material cost will be marked up a second time by the order's main markup percentage. The cover and text buttons underneath for both sheet and roll correspond to, again, how much ink is required to complete your job. And finally, the weight per square foot and cost per square foot relate to wide format printing, and therefore have nothing to do with today's training. Now, one thing I glossed over is that under the ink, presses, and paper, there's an update template button. If you need to change information about your press, such as the run speed, or change information about your material, such as the cost per square foot, you can make your changes and hit the Update All Templates button from that respective screen, so that way any template that utilizes that particular press, ink, or paper type will have its entirety of its information updated accordingly, so that way you don't have to enter each template that you've built and make changes. After you finish filling out all of that information, the final thing we'll need to do is actually get our service to launch the print calculator and also set up our bindery services. All of that's controlled here within the Standard Services submenu. Any service that has the launch action of print calc is defined upon selecting the service action itself and selecting launch print calc. Note that there are two other calculators. They're both wide format calculators, so they won't be applied today. If you set your print calculator action, then the base price, run rate, etc. are ignored because the calculator itself has a much more detailed method of pricing, costing, and handling for print time. The other tabs in here, like the service type, determine where it appears, taxable for whether or not taxes are applied to it, etc. And as a special note, the show on DJB and calendar and show on shop floor view correspond to the ability to see on the production board and also mark time against it. If you have services that you want to be made available within the print calculator, like our perforating service in our example earlier, you can do so by entering that service and checking the Print Additional Service checkbox. This, when checked, makes it available for selection under the Additional Services tab of the print calculator, and also under the multi-part, which we'll show you in another training. You'll have a couple of different methods of pricing here. Where you have your base price, here you'll list your sale price per unit. Your sale cost per unit. You can then apply markup to it by having the markup checkbox checked underneath it to make it available for integration with the markup from the job itself. And the unit area itself corresponds to how the quantity of what's being asked for is determined. If you have this set to quantity, then it defaults to the quantity for the job, such as our 80,000 in our example earlier. If you have it set to NA, then it's more like a one-time setup fee or service cost that you don't actually have to manually enter each time. Volume pricing in here, setup fee, and run rate for your additional services will all be accounted for. So do make sure to use those as you need. If we've got our services control set up, there really isn't that much else left to look at. You've seen how everything schedules itself. You've seen some of the reports that references information. You've seen how to apply what we've gone through in general workflow. With that said, thank you for attending today's print estimating training. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at support@virtualsystems.com. support@printreach.com. Alternatively, you can call us at area code 425-828-9495 extension 2.